So thanks, John, for
Pleasure.
coming along
Yeah.
and letting us give you this interview. So we'll be interviewing you about our topic for
Okay.
our Melbourne assignment, which is how cultures, different nationalities affect and
Yes.
change Melbourne as a city.
Yes.
So let's get going.
Okay.
In what ways do you think that the wide range of cultures and nationalities contribute to Melbourne, like sport, economics,
Yes.
different ways?
Well, Melbourne's a very cosmopolitan city, and so it's a very culturally diverse city, and that means that you've got very strong influences from communities from around the world that impact our civic life, that impact our choices of sports, that impact the cultural activities in the city. And so, for example, with sport, in this city, soccer or football, as they call it internationally, would be the most popular it is anywhere in Australia. And then you see it in traditional Australian sports like Australian rules football. If you go and participate in community Aussie rules football at the grassroots level on weekends, you'll see people from all communities and from communities around the world who've migrated to Melbourne playing in these sports. So Melbourne benefits from having strong cultural diversity, but equally the social fabric of Melbourne ties these communities together well. It has historically. Obviously, there are now new challenges that are coming up through some of the radicalisation of certain parts of communities and young teens in particular. There's a particular challenge here in Melbourne, but historically it's been a diverse but very strongly integrated community.
So what do you think is the most influential foreign culture or country in Melbourne? How does it affect, and what do you think is...
The largest international community here, or the two largest, are Greeks and Italians, historically, and that came about through post-war migration here. And it's one of those things that people had family members here, so when they migrated to Australia, they knew people in Melbourne as opposed to other cities, and so they'd come to Melbourne. It's changing now, where there's more immigration from Asia that's happening into Melbourne, but that's happening around Australia. And so the cultural fabric of the city continues to change, and it changes in a good way. It keeps bringing new influences into the town and keeps it evolving, and obviously with Australia's economic fortunes being tied very closely to Asia now,
Yep.
getting more Asian immigration here and more Asian residents here in Melbourne is a good thing. It promotes cultural understanding and trade ties and all those sorts of things.
So what cultures do you think have grown particularly over the last few years, and how do you think they've changed?
Well, I think as I said, I think there's been strong growth in Asian communities here in Victoria. Very strong investment by Asian investors in the property market here in Australia, in Melbourne.
Yeah.
And so that's probably the fastest growing part of the sort of the migrant or immigrant community, or non-resident, non-citizen resident community here in Victoria. But also what's happened, there's been a relaxation by the Australian government of working holiday visa rules. And so now there's a very substantial population of young people coming here on working holidays. And I know that because my wife is she's the consul for France here in Victoria. And so she looks after the French community here in Melbourne. And there's about 10 years ago, there would have been about 7,000 young French people here in Melbourne. Now there's about double that number here on working holidays.
So do you think Melbourne is as culturally aware as it could be, like regarding topics such as racism, diversity, or do you think it could be better?
I think there's a very strong atmosphere and attitude of tolerance and here in Melbourne, of tolerance, of understanding, of cross-cultural understanding, and communities coming together without imposing uniformity on different communities. And so I think in a lot of ways Melbourne has the best of all worlds. As I said, there are new challenges now with the radicalisation of young people in the Muslim community, and that's a challenge that all communities around Australia are facing, but here in Melbourne in particular, because there is a large Muslim community, like in Sydney, that's a challenge that is a new one. And I think you'll find over the next 10, 20 years that challenge will be met successfully here. Yeah.
So you've been in Melbourne quite a while. Has any cultural change and development been noticeable, and if so, in what ways?
I think Melbourne's continued to become a more international city. Australia is becoming more economically integrated with Asia. It's critical to our economic future for all the young people that you understand that we're living in the Asian century. The Australian economy is small. We've only got 23 million people here, and to our north we've got 2 billion people. We've got about 40% of the world's population, and so there's huge opportunities for Australia economically in the Asian region. And so Melbourne's evolving with that, and it's becoming more international. It's looking northward more, more aware of opportunities in Asia than it was 20 years ago. And it's also become a more open society since I arrived here. It's people like myself who grew up in Queensland, who came here from didn't grow up in Melbourne, are absolutely welcomed here in Melbourne and can do very well if you work hard.
So do you think Melbourne locals are accepting and welcoming when it comes to culture and nationality, immigrants?
Very much so.
Yeah.
This is a really open and welcoming and tolerant society, and a great place to live.
Do you think Melbourne is a world leader when it comes to culture and nationality and having a wide range?
I think so. Melbourne regularly rates as one of the world's most livable cities, and one of the reasons for that is because we do have a relatively harmonious culture here, and people say that Melbourne is the sporting capital of the world. It's a tag that Melbourne likes to give itself. I didn't believe it till I arrived here, but maybe I've been here too long, but I actually believe it's true, and they love their sport here in Melbourne. And sport provides a very strong social cohesion for the community. It brings different parts of the community together, because when you're playing in a team with somebody, and when you're working as a team together for a common outcome, it doesn't matter what background you come from. And so sport is a wonderful way of bringing people together. So it's another way that Melbourne comes together as a community.
Yeah. How do you think Melbourne sets itself apart from other cities in Australia regarding these topics?
I think it comes from family backgrounds, it comes from community attitudes, it comes from a lot of institutions here that welcome people who come here from different communities. There's, for example, here in Melbourne you'll find the Asylum Seekers Resource Centre, which is a not-for-profit organisation that's set up to help help asylum seekers and find their way in the Australian community and find jobs and make connections and establish themselves. And so there's a lot of institutions that work quietly behind the scenes here to help international people find their feet in Australia.
So do you think Melbourne has enough events and festivals to support the wide range of cultures present, and does it do enough, like the city and council?
Yes, it does. I think there's a tremendous number of festivals and the like here in Melbourne, and whether they're sporting or cultural or based around literature, like here at the State Library, we have regularly International Cultural Days here at the State Library, where we have books and cultural displays from different communities, and so there's a lot of things that do help the different communities interact with their own communities, but also connect with the broader Australian community. I think there is, as I say, there is a evolving challenge to make sure that the Muslim communities here in Melbourne feel strongly integrated and provided with lots of opportunities here in Melbourne.
So how often are you involved with cultural events through things like the library, your position with the MCG and the cricket club?
So I chaired the Trust of Melbourne Cricket Ground for 14 years, and some would say that is culture of Melbourne. The MCG, it's in some ways it's the spiritual headquarters of Melbourne for a lot of people. being a sporting town. And the MCG is a wonderful place where the community comes together.
Yep.
So chief executives and community leaders come together with people from all walks of life, and in a very open environment there at the MCG. The State Library, we have events all the time that appeal to different parts of the community. So last year we had a French exhibition for the Victor Hugo musical, Les Miserables. Recently we had an exhibition about Bohemians in Melbourne, so people who came from a more of a Bohemian and artistic background. And 3 years ago we had a exhibition of Persian manuscripts that brought together a lot of the Iranian and Middle Eastern communities. And so there's a lot of these things that happen here, and it's very much an immense and cultural festival-driven town.
So what are some unique events that you've seen being brought to Melbourne by foreign cultures, immigrants and different nationalities?
Oh, well, look, as one example is they have a night market down by the Yarra River during Christmas, during summertime, where it's based on the night markets in Singapore. And so you go down there, it's just all Asian food, and it's an Asian environment, Asian food, and it's modelled explicitly on Singapore. And it's tremendously popular, yeah.
Last one. Do particular nationalities, have you seen them prefer like any sports in particular for each culture, and if so, where have you seen it?
Oh, I think in soccer you do get the European communities and Latin American communities here in Melbourne do strongly prefer the global game, as they call it. And then you're seeing some of these smaller sports starting to grow in popularity that reflect the traditional backgrounds of some of the Asian communities. So sports like table tennis and the like are starting to grow quietly behind the scenes. I also chair the Australian Sports Commission, and so we're acutely conscious of these trends that are impacting Australian life. And so these sport is evolving in Australia. Sports like Australian rules football still bring together people from all walks of life, but there are sports like soccer, table tennis, judo, taekwondo, these sports that have come from different cultural backgrounds that are actually growing very strongly in a quiet way.
Well, thanks, John. Thanks for your time.
Pleasure. Thanks very much. Good luck in Melbourne, boys.
Thanks.
So the library is now officially open, so 10 o'clock, so you're welcome to